Hi there, Björn from Physio Innovation. Today's talk is about cleat positioning. It's a fairly technical subject. I wanted to break it down to the type of concept I use for positioning, determining the position of the cleats. I use three main elements to determine so. One of them is the foot type of a given rider. It is the pedal technique. It is also the type of cycling the rider is doing. So if you look at the cleat I have on my own shoe, it's a look KO gray cleat. It leaves me with a bit of pivoting possibility in my pedal like this, 4 degrees actually. I recommend 4 to 6 degrees of pivoting because it gives us a little bit of a replication what we're doing when we are running. So human beings running, it's a completely natural thing. Being totally fixed here whilst we are in the pedals, well, you would compensate elsewhere, and that compensation would happen in the very plastic or the quite plastic mid part of your foot, in your talus joint. It would happen in your knee, it would happen in your hip. So a very fixed KO black cleat here I would only recommend for let's say track riders, sprinters, track riders within shorter distances. For the main part of cyclists, training, racing, somewhat longer distances I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend some freedom of movement, some freedom of pivoting here in the front part of your foot. It makes sense because the foot is a three-dimensional structure, and you are compensating, you are moving like this in your foot. So being able to actually have that pivoting and finishing off that whole three-dimensional movement makes sense. So how do you determine a fore after movement position? On your cleat. Well, look at the foot. If you a good example is a flat-footed rider. What I want to help with for this given rider is that he or she has a little bit less of vasoconstriction and less accumulated neuromuscular fatigue, especially in this lower leg, so your gastrocnemius muscles and the muscles beneath those. Those muscles are going all the way to the toes. They help to make your foot more stiff. So if that given rider had a position of the cleat which was much more forward here, it would mean a lot of leverage. It would mean a lot of workload being done to stiffen up the foot, which is, with a flat-footed person, somewhat more soft. Was it the opposite, for example, with a rider with a higher arch and a stiff, rigid foot, with all its soft tissue, more, you could say stiffer structure, then I would also look at the type of rider he or she is. Is it, for example, a rider with a puncher rider, a sprinter type rider? Then I would give the possibility for that given type of rider to use the leverage by positioning the cleat more forward on the shoe. And this would give that type of rider the ability to use that stiffer structured foot and really get on top of the pedals and do a lot of movement, and also being a little bit quicker and more natural in, you would say, compared to a sprinting movement on a track. Those type of athletes, they mainly run on the front part of their foot. So none of them are striking with their heels first, that's for sure. So compared to that type or those type of athletes and that the human movement, which is completely natural. But again, cycling is different, and that's why it is again a compromise depending on the type of cycling he or she is doing. So that's some of the concepts I use to determine cleat positioning. Then important also is to look again at the pedal technique. So if it is a rider who's got a higher heel or a rider with a lower heel, that also changes a little bit the perspective of how I would position the cleat. So if you went by the old school technique, which is still being used as a kind of golden standard, there isn't really any scientific basis to say that this is the golden standard. It's always been like this, mainly because back in the old days you could take the shoe like this and bend it. So you would try and position the cleat where you have just before that type of bend you have with your toes. So that is, here you got the first metatarsal bone and you got the lump here. And what many bike fitters are still doing is that they measure the middle of the lump or a little bit towards the rear, and then they position the cleat in the very center where you got the small thing here that determines where is the middle of the pedal spindle. So they try to adjust that anatomical mark or measure so that it's aligned, so to speak. But if you have a rider with a higher heel or lower heel, etc., that all changes the center of movement. So that's why I don't go with that technique, and I don't really buy into it. I use the other concepts, as I've already explained, to determine how can we use the type of foot, the structure of the foot, how can we alleviate pressure and workload, and what does this imply into the specific type of cycling the rider is doing. So another example, for example, let's say a triathlete's cleat positioning. A triathlete, as we know, they would have a bike leg a run leg to do after the bike leg, and for the long distance triathletes, you could help them to reduce a little bit the workload being done by the gastrocnemius muscles here in the back, these ones, by positioning the cleat more towards the back. So again, less leverage. That could be done and obtained if that given rider learned another maybe pedal technique to really relieve these type of or this part of the body, those muscles that will be used and used up during the running part. So that's one way to look at it. You could look at a track sprinter or track riders. Well, if you look at them, they often have a higher heel. They got the inertia going on from the pedaling phase. It's going really quick. So this again, when it goes quick and high RPM, rounds per minute, as we say, then you would tend to have a somewhat higher heel because it's just more natural. It's quicker to get your foot on over the top, and here you would perhaps give the rider the possibility to get that type of snap. Okay, so you position the cleats a little bit more forward. Again, you shouldn't be scared about doing so, because this carbon sole is so stiff, so you don't have that type of movement around your toes here any longer. It's gone. Those are the concepts I use to determine the position of the cleat. And then you got the positioning of the cleat in many different systems, fairly complex, some with laser, and here I've just got a quite simple system, the Bike Ergonomics. It's a plate where I use these holes here to position the cleat in. It could be Shimano, Look, or Speedplay. Then you can adjust it millimeter precise here with tape measures and really play around with the different angles, fore, after, and so on and so on. You could use that, or if you got a really trained eye and you haven't done any pen drawings around your cleats, then you could change a cleat by taking one off and still keeping the other one on, put the new one on, and then what I do is that I take the bolts as a measure towards the inner part of these holes to really be sure and measure with different tools that it's the same distance as the opposite one, and then obviously afterwards you do the opposite one. So that could be something to go with for a rider that doesn't have any pain, any issues or any injuries. Yes, I think I'll just keep it with that for today. Otherwise, it's going to be too long. It's again complicated process with the cleat. It's not black and white. That's my conclusion for today, and hopefully you understand a little bit more about how what type of concept I use for positioning the cleats. So I wish you a good week and a good ride. See you soon in another video. Hopefully I can start talking about some other segments, knee joints, hip joints, etc. It'll be fun. So yeah, enjoy it. Have a good ride. Bye bye.